Chapter 1: The Yearly Snoring Contest. Every year in the quiet valley where the dragons lived, there was one event that every dragon looked forward to: the Sleepy Dragons Snoring Contest. The sun would begin to set, the stars would twinkle in the sky, and all the dragons would gather in a big circle to compete. It was a night full of yawns, giggles, and of course, lots and lots of snoring. Now, this wasn't just any contest. The dragon who could snore the loudest would win the big shiny trophy and get to sleep in the comfiest cave for the next year. The bigger dragons like Thunderbelly and Rumbletail were always the favorites to win. Thunderbelly, who was big and strong, had a snore so loud that it could shake the ground. Every time he took a nap, the trees would wiggle and the birds would fly out of the branches. When it was his turn to snore in the contest, the whole valley would rumble like there was a big earthquake. Then there was Rumbletail, who was even bigger than Thunderbelly. Rumbletail had a snore that was so mighty, it would make the mountains echo. His snore sounded like a huge roar and could wake up every dragon in a 100-mile radius. He always smiled proudly as the other dragons cheered. He was known as the loudest dragon in the valley, and no one had ever been able to beat his snore. But this year, there was someone who wasn't so sure about all the noise. It was Redfoot, a tiny dragon with bright red feet. Redfoot wasn't big like Thunderbelly or Rumbletail. He was small, with a little round belly and a funny snout. When Redfoot tried to snore, it wasn't loud at all. In fact, it sounded more like a little sneeze, followed by a soft sound. Achoo! That was it. Redfoot didn't mind too much. He loved his tiny snores. But when he saw the big dragon's mighty snores, he felt a little worried. How could my little snore ever win, he thought. Thunderbelly and Rumbletail are so loud. Maybe I shouldn't enter at all. Redfoot looked at his feet, shuffling them nervously on the soft grass. His red feet looked so small compared to the huge dragons stomping around him. He felt a little sad. I wish I could snore like them, he whispered to himself. Just then, his friend Flutterwing, a dragon with sparkly green scales, flew over and landed beside him. Hey, Redfoot, she said with a big smile. Don't worry, I bet your snore is special just like you. Redfoot looked up and blinked. You really think so? Flutterwing nodded. Of course, everyone has their own way of doing things. You'll see. Just be yourself and have fun. Redfoot wasn't so sure, but he smiled at Flutterwing's kind words. Maybe he could try after all. He took a deep breath, puffing up his little dragon chest. Maybe I'll enter this contest after all, he said to himself, trying to feel a little braver. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the dragons began to line up. It was almost time for the contest to begin. Thunderbelly and Rumbletail were chatting excitedly, getting ready for their big snoring performances. Redfoot stood quietly, looking up at the moon, wondering what he should do. He closed his eyes and whispered, I'm ready to try something different. And that's when he had an idea. Chapter 2: Redfoot's Big Worry. As the stars twinkled in the night sky, the dragons gathered around the big smooth rock in the center of the valley, the Snoring Stone. It was tradition. Every dragon who wanted to compete would take turns curling up on the stone, drifting off to sleep, and letting their snores do the talking. The loudest snore would win. Redfoot gulped. The Snoring Stone looked so big. He watched as Thunderbelly stretched his enormous wings and flopped down on the rock with a thud. The ground shook under his weight. He yawned so wide you could probably fit 10 apples in his mouth at once. I bet my snore will shake the sky this year, Thunderbelly boomed. Rumbletail chuckled, his deep voice rumbling like thunder. We'll see about that. I've been practicing extra hard. My snore might just wake up the sun. The other dragons laughed and cheered. Everyone was excited to hear the biggest, loudest snores ever. Well, almost everyone. Redfoot's tiny tail curled around his feet as he sat near the back of the crowd. He wanted to join the contest, but his snore wasn't big or loud or ground-shaking. It was just, well, small. Last time he practiced, his snore had sounded like hick. Not exactly what you'd call mighty. What if they laugh at me? Redfoot mumbled to himself. He thought about trying to make his snore louder. Maybe if he puffed up really big like Rumbletail, or maybe if he held his breath and then let it all out at once. He took a deep breath and tried it right there. Nope, still tiny. Just then, Flutterwing landed beside him again, tilting her head. What was that? She asked, giggling. Redfoot sighed. That was my best snore. Flutterwing tapped her chin. Well, maybe your snore isn't big, but maybe it could be something else. Redfoot blinked. Something else? Yeah! Flutterwing flapped her wings excitedly. What if your snore wasn't the loudest, but the funniest? Redfoot's eyes widened. He had never thought about that before. Every year, dragons competed to be the loudest, but what if he tried something different? What if I made a snore that sounded silly? Redfoot thought out loud. Like a snore that makes everyone laugh instead of shake the ground? Flutterwing grinned. Now you're thinking like a real champion. Redfoot felt a small flicker of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to be the biggest or loudest. Maybe he could be the funniest snorer the valley had ever seen. As the contest was about to begin, Redfoot took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what would happen, but one thing was certain. He was going to try. Chapter 3. The contest begins. The moon shone bright above the valley as the dragons settled in for the big contest. The snoring stone was cool and smooth, ready for the sleepy dragons to show off their snores. The crowd of dragons gathered around, whispering and giggling, excited to hear the loudest snores of the year. Redfoot sat near the back, his tiny tail wrapped around his feet. His heart thumped like a little drum. This was it. The contest was starting, and soon it would be his turn. The dragon judge, a wise old dragon named Snorebeard, stepped forward, stroking his long, fluffy whiskers. Welcome, welcome, he boomed. It's time for our great yearly contest. As always, the rules are simple. Each dragon will take turns snoring. Whoever has the mightiest, loudest snore shall be crowned this year's champion. The crowd cheered. Thunderbelly and Rumbletail puffed up their chests. Redfoot gulped. Here we go. First up was Thunderbelly. The enormous dragon stretched, let out a mighty yawn, and flopped down on the snoring stone with a boom. The ground shook beneath him. He took one deep breath, then another, and then... The trees shuddered. The rocks rattled. A family of squirrels fell out of a tree nearby, their fur puffed up in surprise. The crowd gasped, then burst into applause. Now that's a snore! Snorebeard chuckled. Next was Rumbletail. The big dragon cracked his neck, stretched his wings, and curled up tightly. He took a deep breath, and then... Gross! Thud, thud, thud! It was so deep and rumbly it sounded like a mountain rolling over in its sleep. The pebbles on the ground bounced. A nearby pond rippled like someone had thrown a big rock in it. The other dragons cheered and stomped their feet, sending little puffs of dust into the air. What a performance, Snorebeard announced. That one might have been our loudest yet. Redfoot's wings twitched nervously. His turn was coming up. One by one, the other dragons took their turns. Snortlefang's snore was short but loud, like a dragon sneezing in his sleep. Dozzlepuff's snore sounded like a train chugging up a hill. Puff, puff, puff! Grizzlebeak snored so deeply the ground made a soft sound that tickled everyone's toes. Each snore was bigger, louder, and stronger than Redfoot had ever imagined. Then, at last, Snorebeard turned toward him. And now, our final contestant, Snorebeard announced. Step forward, young Redfoot. The dragons turned to look at him. Redfoot's stomach fluttered. His feet felt extra small against the big, wide, snoring stone. This is it, he thought. I can't be the loudest, but maybe I can be something else. Redfoot took a deep breath. It was time to try his plan. He lay down on the stone, closed his eyes, wiggled his nose, and then he snored. But not a normal snore. It started as a tiny squeak, then a hiccup, then a whistle, then... The crowd went silent for a moment. Then a giggle, then another. Then suddenly, the entire valley burst into laughter. Dragons rolled onto their backs, snorting and wheezing. A few even had hiccups from laughing so hard. Thunderbelly wiped a tear from his eye. That was amazing, he laughed. Rumbletail clutched his belly, trying to breathe between giggles. I've never heard anything like that. Even Snorebeard was chuckling, his whiskers twitching with amusement. Redfoot blinked. He hadn't made the loudest snore, but he had made the funniest. And the dragons loved it. Chapter 4. Redfoot Beats the Odds. Redfoot sat up, blinking in surprise. He had expected some laughter, but not this much. The dragons were rolling on the ground, clutching their sides, their laughter echoing through the valley. Even the big, mighty Thunderbelly was wiping tears from his eyes, trying to catch his breath. That was the silliest snore I've ever heard, Rumbletail wheezed between giggles. I thought my belly was going to pop from laughing. Snorebeard, still chuckling, clapped his claws together. In all my years judging this contest, I have never, ever seen a snore like that. His whiskers twitched as he smiled. Young Redfoot, you may not have shaken the ground, but you shook the entire valley with laughter. Redfoot's red feet wiggled excitedly. So, does that mean I did okay? Flutterwing landed beside him, grinning. Redfoot, you didn't just do okay, you were amazing. Snorebeard cleared his throat, raising his voice. Dragons of the Valley, I believe we have a new champion. The crowd roared with cheers. The dragons stomped their feet and flapped their wings, making the trees sway. The excitement echoed through the mountains. Snorebeard lifted the big, shiny golden pillow trophy high into the air. This year's winner of the Sleepy Dragons Snoring Contest is Redfoot. Redfoot's eyes went wide. I won? He had dreamed of this moment, but he never thought it would actually happen. As he stepped forward, the other dragons chanted his name. Redfoot! 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 Thunderbelly gave him a big thump on the back, which nearly knocked him over, and Rumbletail beamed. I think this is the most fun we've ever had at the contest. You changed the rules tonight, little dragon. Redfoot grinned. Maybe he hadn't been the biggest. Maybe he hadn't been the loudest. But he had been himself, and that was better than anything. That night, as the dragons settled down to sleep, something very funny happened. Instead of their usual thunderous, earth-shaking snores, the dragons started copying Redfoot's funny snore. Hawk, squawk, fss! Hick, squeak, wuss! Flutterwing flapped her wings sleepily. I think you just changed dragon history, Redfoot. Redfoot giggled as he snuggled up on the softest, comfiest rock he had ever felt, the winner's sleeping spot. The moon shone above him, and a soft, warm breeze rustled through the trees. He let out a happy sigh. Then, with one final funny snore, he drifted off to sleep. And soon the whole valley was filled with the silliest, happiest snores anyone had ever heard. The end. Good night, little dragon.